What's up guys, Block FPL here and welcome back to another Fantasy Premier League video. This time let's talk about Game Week 26 captaincy, and for me it will be triple captaincy. Even though there are two choices I like, so I can't really decide between the two. I think looking forward, I don't really see any better triple captaincy options at any point this season, so that makes it a triple captaincy decision for me. But first, let's take a quick look back at Game Week 25. So it was actually a good week for me. Grealish not playing worked out pretty well as Stones comes in off the bench. The Dallas transfer worked well. Bamford captaincy was fine. Obviously, Bruno or Rashford would have done better, but I was always going to captain Bamford, so not a big deal at all. Only 4 points difference anyways, but yes, the only player that got 2 points or less was Mohamed Salah. So that is how poorly Liverpool are doing at the moment. Now, getting on to the big decision. First things first, the most popular captaincy option for most people right now is not going to be in my team, and even if I had him, I don't think he's my favorite captaincy option, and that's Harry Kane. I like Calvert-Lewin and Bruno more than him, so before I get into the Calvert-Lewin and Bruno discussion, I'll talk about why. Obviously, Kane's a fine captaincy option, but I think Bruno and Calvert-Lewin slightly edge him. Let's go to understat.com, the EPL section. And let's start off by talking about the matchups. So if we go to expected goals against, this is over the past, since January 19th, I tried to get a date where most teams had about the same amount of games. So expected goals against, we can see Southampton are up there. That's good for Calvert-Lewin. Burnley are up there. That's good for Kane. And West Brom are the next team in terms of teams that these guys play. And first is Crystal Palace, and that's good for Bruno. So each of them have like one sort of big game that's conceded a lot recently. I'd say Crystal Palace and Southampton are the obvious choices as Donna comes and interrupts me. I will say that the Leeds Southampton game is currently not updated into these statistics yet, so I would expect Southampton to look even worse. But looking at these expected goals is much different than looking at goals against. Now, goals against are obviously important, because goalkeepers have to save the ball. It's not all about expected goals. It's about how well the goalkeeper can do. And once we sort by goals against in this period, we can see that Southampton, with only 6 games played, again, the Leeds game is not even counted in this, they've conceded 19 goals, and the second most is West Brom with 14. Both of these teams are the teams that, if we go back to my team, we can see that Calvert-Lewin will play these guys, Southampton and then West Brom. So that looks very good right away. Keeping it simple, they have the most goals against. Now, going back to this, where are all of the other teams? We got a bunch of other fixtures to talk about. So Tottenham play Burnley down here. Now, you'll notice they were much worse in terms of expected goals against, but goals against, well, they're right in the middle of the table. They have Pope, and he does very well. Same thing with Fulham. Fulham, 10 goals against, or expected goals against, and only 7 goals against. A lot of this comes down, in my opinion, to how good Areola is, and I think both of these teams will end up sitting deep, and I think that could be an issue for Tottenham. They don't have a bunch of creative players, in my opinion. It does depend on which lineup they start, of course. But they have been struggling a lot recently. If we take a look at their recent fixtures, I don't have a Tottenham player in my team, but we can see that, 2-1 against West Ham. They only scored 1. Okay, that's not so bad. West Ham's not a terrible fixture. They didn't score against Man City. You can't really blame them for that too much. And before that, I don't think they had Kane. They did score 2 against West Brom. That could be good for Calvert-Lewin or good for Kane, however you want to look at that, I suppose. 0 against Chelsea. And before that, 0 against Brighton. So not the most creativity. I know some of these games are without Kane, but we can also go to expected goals over this time period, and we can see that Tottenham have been second worst. So overall, it's not looking great. They've had a lot of fail games, I would say, where they should have scored more, and they haven't. I think Kane's still a fine option, but I think the fixtures are against good goalkeepers and teams that are defensively focused, and I think they'll be able to at least hold Tottenham to, I would almost say a max of 2 goals. Of course, whenever you have Kane and Son in a team, it can always be more than that. But I would say the most likely outcome in both matches is that Tottenham score a maximum of 2 goals. And that's simply how Fulham have played recently. I've had Areola, so I've really kept up with them. Besides this game in Game Week 21, where they conceded 2 to West Brom, if we go to Areola's recent performances. Just going to the history, if it will load, of course. 1-0 win against Sheffield, 1-1 against Burnley, 2-0 win against Everton, 0-0 against West Ham, and a 2-0 loss to Leicester. I would say that's pretty good. So no threes in there. Some great results, only conceding 1 or even 0 goals. So for that reason, I think these fixtures could cause Kane and Son some issues. If you have him, obviously Kane's a great captaincy option. But for me personally, and for all of you that don't have Kane, and it's not easy to bring him in, which will be most people in most cases because he costs so much, and so many people have the likes of Watkins, Bamford, Ings. It may not be an easy transfer. I am personally backing the move of not tearing your team apart to get in Kane. Son would be easier to get in. I could do Rashford to Son, but again, these fixtures aren't maybe as great as they look on paper. I think they're still good, don't get me wrong, but I do like Bruno and Calvert-Lewin more this week. So, moving on to Bruno and Calvert-Lewin. I've already talked about how since January 19th, the two teams that Calvert-Lewin play have conceded the most goals. Southampton is the obvious great matchup here. They also play West Brom, who have given up the most expected goals against over the course of the season. So they've, I could see Southampton turning around their defense a little bit easier than I could West Brom, like in terms of not just form, in terms of like a whole season, like the entire structure. There's just not quite as much talent in that team. So I think that's a more safer pick, but a more safe pick would be the grammatically correct way to say that. And I think that Southampton have simply been in terrible form recently, especially down that left-hand side. So we'll see what happens, but I think both of these matchups are very good for Calvert-Lewin. And looking at Bruno, well, the one fixture we haven't talked about, I love the Crystal Palace matchup. There's no way around that. Right now I'm on Calvert-Lewin. Obviously, you saw my team. And the other fixture, well, it's against Chelsea, and they've been very, very good defensively. Other than Man City, I would say they've been the best team defensively recently. Now, let's take a look at Chelsea's fixtures. How difficult have they actually been? Because this could make a difference, right? If they've only played against easy teams, then of course you would expect their expected goals against to be very good. So they've played Southampton, Newcastle, Sheffield United, Tottenham, Burnley, Wolves, Leicester, and I think we can include Fulham in that, maybe not. But overall, those are some pretty great matchups. For this reason, I think that Chelsea may not be as difficult of a fixture as it looks on paper. Looking at a lot of these teams, they simply lack creativity, and there's no way around that. They haven't played Man City. They haven't played Manchester United. I would say those are probably the two teams that are looking very good right now in terms of creating chances. They haven't even played Villa. Sheffield United, Newcastle, Southampton, Burnley, Wolves. At the time, especially Wolves. These teams really don't bring much to the table offensively. Maybe Southampton do. And now Tottenham, that's an interesting one, but you just have to give them credit there. They did well against Tottenham. So, yeah, obviously it's not a great matchup, but I think the Chelsea matchup could, as Don interrupts me again, I think the Chelsea matchup could scare some people off, but maybe it shouldn't. They haven't really been tested that much by a great team is the whole point I'm trying to make here. And going by the same date, if we sort by expected goals, we can see probably, in my opinion, the number one reason to go for, or for me, why I just can't decide, and why Bruno over Calvert-Lewin could be the way to go, and that is because Manchester United are simply more trustworthy than Everton. Now, United have had a lot of failed games. If we take a look at these, they're not going to be great, and this is what I'm really worried about with Bruno. Now, obviously, as I always say with Bruno, he can always get a lucky penalty and get points, and we've seen him in recent games, actually. He scored 4 Premier League games in a row. We've seen him just get the one chance and score. He hasn't had a high quantity of shots. Last game, he had 1 shot, and he scored against Newcastle. His assist was pretty lucky, too. So, but this is the kind of things Bruno does regularly, I suppose. Recently, well, it's worth pointing out that the 9-0 against Southampton, there was a red card, and obviously that's a matchup that Calvert-Lewin has, so you could frame that kind of however you want it to. Scoring 3 against Everton looks nice, but the issue is the 1-1 against West Brom. Before that, they had games where they scored 1 against Sheffield United. They didn't score against Liverpool, who were kind of poor defensively recently, right? but they probably were scared in that game. I don't know. 2 against Fulham is about average. 3 against Newcastle is fine. I would say the 1-1 against West Brom makes it a little bit weird. But again, that's a team that Calvert-Lewin plays. So if you frame that as West Brom being good defensively, then that would affect Calvert-Lewin's sort of status, and vice versa for Bruno. If you think Manchester United were just poor that game, then maybe you would lean more towards Calvert-Lewin or whoever your other option would be. With that said, Bruno still did score in that game. And that's, I got to say, I thought they had a couple more recently, but it turns out they haven't. I think in my head I was thinking of the Everton 3-3 as a fail, which it is a fail as a team, but they scored 3 goals, so that looks pretty good. Overall, they scored 9, they scored 3, they scored 1, they scored 3. Those are good matchups, though. There's not the Chelsea game. Again, they haven't really had last 2 times they played against a big team. They played Liverpool, Arsenal, and they didn't score any in either game. Both were 0-0 draws. So if they keep in that form in these sort of big games and they keep them cagey, we're looking at a maximum of like 1 or 2 goals for United in Chelsea game. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a 1-0 or 1-1, 0-0. A maximum of 2 goals in that game wouldn't surprise me too much. So I can see why a lot of people are writing it off as simply, he has Crystal Palace plus 2 points. If you really think Chelsea are going to keep the clean sheet in that game. And that is why I currently have it on Calvert-Lewin. I think in both games he has the higher upside. You could see him getting a hat trick in either one. In fact, against West Brom, he actually did get a hat trick last time, but that was in Game Week 2 when Everton were much better than they are now. I don't think there's really any other way to say that. And West Brom were probably a little bit poorer at the time too. No Sam Allardyce, all that good stuff. What did he do last time against Southampton? Last time against Southampton, Everton lost 2-0, so that's not great either. Now, reverse fixtures don't mean that much to me, but it is good to see a big killing last time out because, maybe there's something tactical in that, but it sucks to see a loss. So with that said, I think the overall numbers pick, let's go to, besides the matchups, let's go to the actual players themselves. So this is over the course of the season. Again, we're just going to go over everything about these 3 guys, mainly Calvert-Lewin and Bruno, because that's the decision I have to make. So expected goals per 90 minutes over the course of the season. Calvert-Lewin, 0.65. Kane, 0.56. And Bruno, 0.5. All very good. Non-penalties, expected goals per 90 minutes. I figured I would throw this on there just so you can see how much Bruno's is inflated. His non-penalty XG per 90 minutes is 0.24, while Kane's is 0.45, and Calvert-Lewin's doesn't change at all, up there at 0.65 still. 0.65 still. I probably didn't say that right the first time. Now, the most expected assists per 90 minutes over the course of the season is Bruno at 0.38. We've got Kane at 0.26 and Calvert-Lewin at 0.04. Now, Understat.com does not take into consideration fantasy assists, and Calvert-Lewin has got 6 fantasy assists this season, as in assists that FPL counts, but regular stat trackers don't count. As you can see here on the site, he's got 0. But he's got an assist from being fouled in the box, having shots that the keeper saves and someone else taps in. That, those kind of assists that count for Fantasy Premier League. So overall, his assist threat really is just sort of a result from him being in good positions and rebounds and that kind of thing. So he could get assists, even though his expected assists per 90 minutes is pretty poor. Now, I think if we sort this by from January 19th, just so that we get Bruno and Calvert-Lewin on the same amount of games, we will see, or same amount of, Calvert-Lewin's missed some, but you get the point. Expected goals per 90 minutes, basically over the past month, Calvert-Lewin 0.6, and we see Bruno's has dropped down pretty significantly compared to his season numbers, down to 0.38. That's a reduction of 0.12, and his non-penalties expected goals per 90 minutes has dropped at about the same rate. His non-penalty expected goals per 90 minutes is basically half that of his total. So that trend sort of keeps up at 0.17. And the expected assist is right there at the same rate with 0.37. So, and we can see Kane's numbers, less expected goal involvement, or, compared to Bruno, but more, and less assist threat as well, but more non-penalty expected goals per 90 minutes. You could say he's been unlucky to not get a penalty if you want to look at it that way. But the numbers themselves, if you just look at these, and if you look at expected goal involvement per 90 minutes, you would be looking at Bruno at 0.75 per 90 minutes, Calvert-Lewin at 0.63 per 90 minutes, and then Kane at 0.42 per 90 minutes. So just expected goal involvement since January 19th per 90 minutes. Bruno wins, Calvert-Lewin is second, Kane is third. Now, there have been injuries in that. It's per 90 minutes, so, again, I'm trying to do the best I can to make the most of these statistics. But, yeah, and we have some sub appearances in there, and it doesn't take into effect fantasy assists and all that, but straight up numbers, Bruno is the best option, and that's pretty typical of Bruno. But when we factor in the Chelsea game, is that enough for me personally to make Calvert-Lewin a better option than Fernandes, and for me to choose Calvert-Lewin for triple captaincy over Bruno? Because Bruno, you could make the argument that he has better numbers overall. I would say that overall Calvert-Lewin has more goal threat. Last game, Calvert-Lewin had 3 shots, Bruno had 1. Or last time they started, I believe. And other potential things to think about. Calvert-Lewin being injured. Is he going to be rotated in one of the games and come off the bench? Maybe Bruno rotation. Again, I highly doubt that. There would be no way to predict that if it does. I think Calvert-Lewin is slightly more likely to be rotated. I wouldn't see it happening in either case. Let's take a quick look at the Premier League standings, simply because this sort of is important to look at. Manchester United, you could say they're fighting for the title, but they may be more focused on other competitions at the moment. That shouldn't really make a difference. But again, we're going to look at everything in this video, or everything that I can think of at least. And Everton, I think they have a little more to fight for in terms of the league. I think they've got the Champions League spot to fight for that they could realistically catch up on. They've got a game in hand, and, well, they're 3 points behind Europa League spot. They're 3 points behind Chelsea. So I think realistically they can look at this and say, you know what, we can get to the Champions League, especially considering that West Ham are currently in those slots, and, well, you could hope that they simply lose their form. It's probably not going to happen at this point in the season, but you get the point. And they also have a good run of fixtures here, so I think they'll be confident enough that they can say, you know what, we're going to focus on the league. We need to play Calvert-Lewin in these kind of easy games just to make sure we win. So, again, the chances of him being rotated are small, but I'm just going over everything. So with all that said, I think the biggest difference here is, as I said earlier, Calvert-Lewin has more upside in each game. Now, Bruno is always going to be a great option, and we're really splitting hairs here. But when we look at this expected goals against, Chelsea being so good recently is really what puts me off, as well as the fact that in their last 2 games against big teams, Manchester United have drew 0-0. That in no way means the same thing's going to happen. But we've also seen Chelsea play pretty cagely recently. They haven't had a lot of high-scoring games. So I think the most likely outcome of the Chelsea United game is going to be pretty low scoring. Now, of course, Bruno is, if anybody's going to score, it's most likely going to be Bruno. For United, that's what I would say. Or score or get an assist. He's going to be involved somehow if they do something. That's just how it goes with Bruno a lot of times. So, of course, he can always punish me. I don't think Calvert-Lewin's quite as talismanic as Bruno is, and that's the one downside of him. But this high upside is simply what I have to go for here. And at the end of the day, maybe some of the factor of fun is coming into it. I want to go for the higher upside option. He's also more differential. It's simply more fun to say you triple captain Calvert-Lewin, then to triple captain Bruno. Unless, of course, Bruno gets a hat trick and Calvert-Lewin doesn't, then it will be miserable. But I think you get the point here. So, looking at these goals against, I think this is another deciding factor for me. Southampton and West Brom recently. Let's change the date. Let's go since December. Let's go since Christmas. Goals against. West Brom and Southampton are still right at the top. West Brom actually then surged into the lead. But Newcastle fit their way up there too, but none of the players I mentioned played them this week. So, yeah, I think this number here is bound to stay the same, and I think they'll concede goals. The one thing I'm worried about, I just wish Calvert-Lewin had penalties, and I wish Everton were a little more trustworthy. Other than that, I think Calvert-Lewin is almost a perfect captaincy pick. But Bruno's obviously just such a great option. But for this reason, I think I'm going to stick it on Calvert-Lewin. Again, it just comes down to him having better fixtures overall. Hey, Donna, I don't know if she agrees or disagrees. Maybe I'll have to get her pick later on in the week. But hopefully you were able to gain some insight from this. If you don't have Calvert-Lewin and you have Ings, for example, or Bamford, if you can make that transfer, I think it's worth a look at least. Does it fit your team? Does it fit your blank and double game week strategy? If it does, then definitely consider transferring Calvert-Lewin in. You may want to wait and just make sure that he's going to be healthy for both games because we don't know for sure. I believe he had a hamstring injury, so that could be lingering. So, again, I would probably wait for news on that. With that said, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. And me and Donna will see you next time.